Miracle on the Han River refers to the extraordinary economic development of South Korea during the latter half of the 20th century, extending into the early 21st century. This phenomenon has earned well-deserved recognition from economic experts worldwide. The transformation of South Korea from a war-torn, impoverished, primarily agrarian country in the mid-20th century to one of the world's wealthiest nations is nothing short of impressive. Despite the lack of natural resources, South Korea rapidly developed its economy, leveraging international trade and the benefits of globalization. The country integrated into the global economy through export-oriented industrialization. In just a few decades, South Korea has become a leader in manufacturing and technological innovation, boasting globally recognized brands such as Samsung, LG, Hyundai, and KIA. This remarkable development has propelled South Korea into the elite group of Asian tigers and enabled its entry into prestigious multilateral organizations such as the OECD, the G20, the Paris Club, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Prosperity Framework, IPEF. The country is also part of the N11 countries, Next 11, a group identified by Goldman Sachs as potential economies that, along with the BRICS members, could become the world's largest economies by the mid-21st century. Currently, South Korea's economy ranks 10th in the world in terms of nominal GDP, and the country is the world's 8th largest exporter. It holds one of the largest foreign exchange reserves globally. Since the end of authoritarian rule in 1987, the Republic of Korea is considered a nation with a highly developed democracy, boasting the highest level of media freedom in Asia. According to the Human Development Index, it ranks 19th in the world and 5th in the Asia-Oceania region. With a life expectancy of 80.6 years for men and 86.6 years for women, it ranks an impressive 3rd in the world. South Korea's life expectancies for men and women are 2.9 years and 3.5 years longer, respectively, than the average of the 38 member states of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. However, the journey to becoming a developed country with a stable democracy was fraught with challenges. From the very inception of the Republic of Korea on August 15, 1948, the nation underwent tumultuous and often unpleasant political processes. The Korean War between 1950 and 1953 was a fratricidal conflict between the two Koreas, each with different political and social systems. This war, one of the bloodiest of the 20th century, resulted in approximately 3 million Korean civilian casualties. China intervened on North Korea's side, while a UN coalition led by the USA supported South Korea. Seoul changed hands several times, and eventually, the communist forces were pushed back to positions around the 38th parallel, close to the initial positions. After that, the front stabilized, and the last 2 years of the war were a war of attrition without significant changes. In July 1953, an armistice agreement was signed, and in the following decades, the two Koreas took different paths. Since the establishment of the modern Republic of Korea in 1948, a total of 6 republics have emerged. From 1948 to 1960, the country was ruled by the authoritarian leader Syngman Rhee. At that time, the economy was dominated by agriculture. In 1950, land reform began to be implemented, whereby the American military authorities distributed lands previously owned by the Japanese to ordinary peasants. During the Second Republic, which lasted from 1960 to 1961, Prime Minister Chang Mayun also implemented the policy of state capitalism, but also cooperated with Japan, a significant move given Japan's economic power. In 1961, a military junta headed by General Park Chung-hee came to power. This period laid the foundation for the miracle on the Han River. The first national 5-year plan was implemented, focusing on improving agriculture, mining, electricity production, developing chemical fertilizers, the oil industry, ironworks, steelworks, and constructing roads and ports. The South Korean authorities realized that due to the country's overcrowded nature, the solution was to export products and services. Park's motto was to treat workers like family members, which proved to be a hit as South Korean workers were 2.5 times more productive than American workers. Although Park led a military dictatorship that stifled civil liberties and other citizens' rights, economic progress was taking place. During the Third Republic between 1963 and 1972, the country received millions of dollars from Japan due to property rights claims, and from the US, which, due to its involvement in the Vietnam War, sought to support democratic South Korea as a counterweight to communist North Korea. The government used foreign revenues to achieve a self-sustaining economy and launched the Seoul Initiative to develop rural areas. Strongman rule and cheap labor were catalysts for the growth of the South Korean economy. During the Fourth Republic between 1972 and 1981, South Koreans invested in the chemical industry, relying on the strategy of replacing imported products with domestic ones. The authorities improved workers' rights and wages. The government invested in heavy industry, resulting in the growth of the electronics and steel industries. Heavy industries were located in the south of the country. Factories in Seoul accounted for 25% of factory output in 1978. During the 1970s, income inequality between the industrial and agricultural sectors was a problem. President Park was assassinated in 1979. The Fourth Republic entered a period of political instability under Park's successor, Choi Ha. There was a tense situation in the country. Choi was unofficially deposed by Park's associate Chun Do-hwan in a December 1979 coup. The Fifth Republic, 1981 to 1987, was led by Chun, who staged a coup in 1980, established a military dictatorship, and adopted a new constitution. During the 1980s, the government adopted a conservative monetary policy and tight fiscal measures to control inflation. The money supply was cut in half. Seoul even froze the budget for a short time. Government interventions in the economy decreased, as did restrictions on imports and foreign investments. This move proved successful as the economy became more competitive. To reduce disparities between the rural and urban sectors, Seoul expanded investment in public projects such as roads and other thoroughfares, while improving farm mechanization. These measures were enacted in the early 1980s and, together with improvements in the world economy, contributed to the South Korean economy thriving again in the late 1980s. The country achieved economic growth of 9.2% between 1982 and 1987 and 12.5% between 1986 and 1988. GDP growth was around 10% between 1963 and 1990. During the years of rapid catch-up with the developed world, South Korea used at least 19 of the most important forms of intervention aimed at promoting an export-oriented economy: currency devaluation, preferential access to imported semi-finished products needed to produce export goods with strict controls that prevented abuses, targeted protection of industries, price incentives, tax exemptions for domestic producers, internal exemptions from indirect taxes for successful exporters, lower direct tax on income generated from exports, accelerated depreciation for exporters, certificates of right to import, direct subsidies for exports of selected industries, monopoly rights granted to companies that first achieved exports in target industries, subsidized interest rates, an export credit insurance and guarantee system, creation of free trade zones, establishment of public enterprises to serve as leaders in establishing new industries, promotion of South Korean exports worldwide, improvement of the technological level, coordination of foreign technology licensing agreements by the government, and setting export goals for companies. Chaebols, or large business conglomerates, often family-owned, played a crucial role in the country's industrialization. Chaebols were carefully selected from among successful exporters and granted subsidies and privileges to stimulate economic development. Every conglomerate was started by a family. 10 family Chaebols were responsible for 60% of the growth of the South Korean economy during the period of rapid growth in the second half of the 20th century. The most important Chaebols are Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. Thanks to democratization and the establishment of the Sixth Republic in 1987, in the first half of the 90s, the South Korean economy continued to grow steadily and develop in the private and state sectors. However, in 1997, the Asian financial crisis broke out. After several Asian currencies suffered a major decline, the South Korean won experienced a sharp drop in value. By the end of the year, the IMF had approved USD 21 billion that would be part of a USD 58.4 billion aid package. This loan was the largest bailout package ever offered by the IMF at that time. The moves of the government and foreign creditors curbed the financial problems. Adaptation to the labor market and alternative sources of financing helped significantly. By the end of 1999, the South Korean economy had rebounded, experiencing a GDP growth of 10.5%, prompting President Kim Dae-jung to declare an end to the won crisis. In August 2001, South Korea made its final loan repayment to the IMF, almost 3 years ahead of schedule. The early repayment reflected the strength and resilience of the South Korean economy in the wake of the financial crisis, demonstrating its ability to overcome adversity through diligent economic management and reform. After the full repayment of the IMF loans, South Korea decided to terminate its formal relationship with the IMF in February 2004, thus ending the so-called IMF era. The decision represented a significant milestone in South Korea's economic history and reflected the country's firm commitment to maintaining its economic sovereignty. The economic reforms introduced by Kim were based on the reorientation from state capitalism to the market model and enabled economic growth that was 9.2% in 2000 and 3.3% in 2001 due to the slowdown of the world economy. Growth continued in the following years until the outbreak of the world financial crisis in 2008. Factory production, consumption, car exports, and semiconductor sales all decreased, but a larger crisis was averted. Government stimulus measures and the consumption of goods that were in higher demand due to the drop in exports proved helpful. By 2010, GDP growth had rebounded to an impressive 6.1%. In 1960, North and South Korea were similarly impoverished, ranking among the poorest countries in Asia and Africa. Today, more than half a century later, South Korea's per capita income is estimated to be about 20 times that of North Korea. South Korea's GDP at purchasing power parity, PPP, is around $56,000 per year, higher than Italy's or Spain's. South Koreans' income has risen from 10% of Americans' income in 1970 to about 70% today. The most significant sectors of the South Korean economy include the electronics and telecommunications industry, shipbuilding, the automotive industry, construction, weapon and military equipment production, tourism, and mining. GDP comprises 57% service activities, 32.5% industry, and 2% agriculture. According to this year's estimates, the nominal GDP is $1.7 trillion, ranking the Republic of Korea 10th in the world. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in South Korea fell to 2.5% in May 2023, marking a record low for the third consecutive month and indicating a resilient labor market. The Consumer Price Index rose 3.3% year-on-year in May, according to Statistics Korea, compared to a 3.7% increase the previous month, aligning with a 3.3% forecast in a Reuters survey. This increase was the slowest since October 2021, having peaked at a near 24-year high of 6.3% in July 2022. Demographic aging has already contributed to the moderation of South Korea's potential GDP growth rate, from around 7% per year in the mid-1990s to a projected 1.5% per year by the IMF in 2023. South Korea's potential growth rate could drop to around 1% to 1.5% per year by 2050 due to demographic aging. South Korea is the 22nd smallest country in Asia and the 109th smallest in the world. With 516 inhabitants per square kilometer, it is also one of the most densely populated countries. An exceptionally high proportion of residents, 81%, belong to the urban population, with nearly every fifth resident living in Seoul. South Korean society underwent a transformation as rapid as its economic development following the Korean War. The population more than doubled from 21 million inhabitants in 1955 to over 51 million at the start of the 21st century. Modern education developed rapidly during this period, with significant government involvement, as the Korean people's traditional commitment to education was revived after decades of repression during the Japanese occupation. The expansion of educational institutions and commercial and industrial enterprises in and around large cities attracted an increasing number of rural inhabitants to urban areas. Notably, Seoul's population grew about tenfold from 1945 to the start of the 21st century. reaching around 10 million people. Today, Seoul boasts the fourth largest nominal GDP in the world, trailing only Tokyo, New York, and Los Angeles. While Seoul's history spans more than 2,000 years, it is also a new city in many respects. During the Korean War, the city changed hands multiple times and suffered extensive damage. Today, Seoul is characterized by business districts and towering skyscrapers with glass facades, hotels, restaurants, cultural landmarks, and it is home to over 25 million people when considering the metropolitan area. The quality of life in Seoul is among the highest in the world. Communication media also saw a significant rise over the last century, especially with the publication of newspapers and magazines, while digital media dominates in recent times. Its status as the most media-free country in Asia attests to the level of media freedom. An ambitious program of expanding and modernizing the country's transport infrastructure was also implemented. Perhaps the most noticeable social change in South Korea has been the emergence of a middle class. The land reform carried out in the 1950s, coupled with the expansion of modern education and the economy, led to the disappearance of the once privileged Yangban landowning class, with a new elite emerging from the ranks of the former commoners. Another significant social change was the reduction in family size. Rural to urban migration disrupted traditional family structures, as urban dwellers began living in apartments as nuclear families and having fewer children. Women also fiercely fought for complete equality before the law and greater rights. They were granted the right to register as family heads in the new family household registration system that was implemented in 2008. Under the old system, only men could register as family heads. The new system enhanced women's rights in cases of divorce and custody of children, and equated the rights of adopted children with those of biological children. The Republic of Korea's armed forces are among the strongest in the world, ranking 6th globally, according to the Global Firepower portal. Interestingly, South Korea is the country where Christianity is the most prevalent religion, with 29% of the population identifying as believers, primarily Protestant, surpassing the number of Buddhists, which stands at 23% lately. Starting from the 1990s, South Korea's cultural influence in the world has become increasingly prominent. In other words, it is an exhibition of soft power. The mega-popular Netflix TV series Squid Game, the Oscar-winning film Parasite, the colorful singer PSY and his Gangnam Style, and the chart-topping K-pop band Blackpink are examples of this influence. Korean popular culture is breaking through and conquering international audiences. K-pop, K-dramas, and cinematic productions have spurred a phenomenon known as the Korean Wave. The spread of Korean cultural influence has even reached India, a populous nation of 1.4 billion people, where Korean is the fastest-growing foreign language and is now taught in high schools. In most parts of the world, the mention of South Korea evokes positive comments. South Korea currently has the lowest fertility rate in the world, along with an aging population. The total population is also projected to decrease in the future. The government is concerned that fewer children and an aging society will slow down economic growth and destabilize the social and pension system. In contrast to the optimism and hopes of previous generations, research shows that since 1990, the number of Koreans who believe they have freedom of choice and control over their lives has been declining. It is not yet clear how the authorities will respond to this social crisis, although the dissatisfaction of young people necessitates a fairly swift response. Perhaps the authorities will attempt to preserve the status quo and avoid social change until the situation becomes as revolutionary as it was globally in 1968. It would be more desirable, however, if the government opted for some proactive solution. The nation's future hinges on its response to this existential challenge, whether it finds a path to shared prosperity for the next generation or tragically fails to overcome social divisions. After decades of spectacular GDP growth rates of 6 to 9%, South Korea's GDP has been growing at a more modest 3% per year since 2012. While slower growth is common in developed economies, South Korea also has structural weaknesses. Its economy is overly reliant on its main export product, semiconductors, produced by a handful of large companies such as Samsung, and it is heavily dependent on one large market, China, and the raw materials of a country with which it is currently waging a trade war, Japan. These low growth rates also reflect demographic problems, for which there are few good solutions without significant demographic shifts. The path to overcoming this crisis lies in new, dynamic areas of the economy and the ideas of young Koreans. Particularly promising is the vibrancy of areas like Seongsu-dong, known as Seoul's Brooklyn, and Pangyo Valley, home to Korean high-tech startups and modern entrepreneurs. These locations radiate innovation and creativity, demonstrating that they are part of the most advanced Korea. They break stereotypes that Koreans, due to Confucian social norms, are most successful in hierarchical corporate structures such as Chaebols. Fueled by innovation, the startup economy could be a source of growth that stimulates broader social development. South Korea needs more creative companies like Naver, Korea's equivalent of Google, which made it into the country's top 10 companies for the first time in 2020. Given the proper environment, South Korea could become a premier startup and investment destination, attracting a new generation of entrepreneurial talent while building on its growing image as a global cultural powerhouse.